We see robustly funded and publicly communicated science not as a nice to have, but as a fundamental pillar of human freedom and prosperity. These are the principles of the science marches all over the country today. So today you're going to hear from over a dozen speakers at the top of their fields, but
scientists will not be silent. We all must advocate for science, working to amplify its role in policymaking, to break down barriers between scientists and non-scientists, and to foster a truly diverse and inclusive scientific community. Now, the news since last year's march has been mixed, to say the least. Policy changes at the federal level continue to undercut efforts to address climate change, and there have been well-documented and broad undermining of science at the federal level. If you care about the future, you care about science.
we're here because we see science as a fundamental pillar of human freedom and prosperity. So science is our avenue to the truth. If the truth is obscured, our great American experiment will fail. So here we are standing together for truth. We're demanding truth so that we can deal with problems like the acidification of the ocean, diminishing air quality, dwindling fish stocks, issues related to carbon reduction, and certainly mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change. You all know that 96% of the scientific community believes that climate change is real, and it's hastened by our human actions. Just a few years ago, the United States was considered a leader in environmental policy on the international stage. Today, we're the only member country of the United Nations to reject the Paris Agreement.
As psychologists, we use the power of science to help solve problems affecting people and society. Only through unified action, commitment to funding, and support for research do we have any hope for finding solutions to the myriad of mental health problems facing society. Without science, mental health treatment becomes a guessing game. Without science, myths are perpetuated, and stigma on mental illness becomes pervasive. I celebrate scientific research and policy making based on evidence because they benefit society and improve people's lives. Thank you.
Where is science today as a national priority? Well, it doesn't look so good when you look at it from the point of view of EPA and Scott Pruitt. Pruitt has really put himself at war, and has been for a long time, with environmental science. And I think we've already heard some of what the EPA is doing in terms of scrubbing climate change from websites, getting rid of their scientific advisors, and so on. The way I see it is what we have is, through Scott Pruitt, an oil industry-driven war against science. And the thing is, the way to think about it is that the oil industry knows that there's $6 trillion worth of oil that's still underground, that if they don't consume it and process and sell it, that it's like money left on the table, and they will not abide by that. So that has driven the political career of Scott Pruitt, who, as Attorney General of Oklahoma, sued the EPA over environmental regulations at least 14 times. So how did we get here? How did we get to the point of electing Trump and being more or less complacent about environmental depredation? And what we have to understand is that in the 1960s, rivers were catching on fire. People knew that the state of the environment was in very dire state, and there was a lot of bipartisan support in those days, in the early 70s, for Richard Nixon to create the Environmental Protection Agency. It's very clear to anybody who looks at the big picture of the data out there that the world is warming, and it's a problem, and we don't care enough. I mean, various problems that stem from this. One is very long and much more intense heat waves, superstorms like Sandy become the new normal, droughts that cut into our agricultural production and are ravaging the Mideast, part of the Syrian civil war is due to farmers having to abandon their lands. We have sea level rise as a result. It's a nuisance in Miami, but for Bangladesh, it means that sizable parts of the country are being flooded, and farmers there too have to move into already crowded cities.
For over 2 decades, the Dickey Amendment has inhibited all meaningful federal research into gun violence in the United States. Since it went into effect, CDC annual funding fell by 96%. Unacceptable. As you're all aware, bump stocks were used on a semi-automatic assault rifle in Las Vegas, and the gunman was able to fire 1,100 rounds in 11 minutes, killing 58 innocent people and injuring nearly 500 more. In Connecticut, there is an effort to ban bump stocks and ghost guns right at this moment. However, in addition to that passing through, 2 gun lobby bills also passed through. They want to put guns in our state parks. And they also want to give out lifetime ammunition permits. Currently, gun owners are required to re-permit every 5 years with another background check. So we don't want them to loosen these laws.
As stated here 1 year ago, research cannot be turned on and off like a spigot. There must be sustained and predictable government-supported growth so that researchers can build on previous progress in investment. Millions of Americans depend on science progress to provide hope in the face of potentially devastating diagnosis. For the young scientists out there, there's so much to do to keep your lives exciting and stimulating. Enjoy the thrill of the adventurous ride of research with its ups and downs. Savor the moments when you are the only ones in the world that discover something new, something that no one else knows about. We urge all of you to help us maintain the science infrastructure of our hope, our patients, and all of us deserve. Thank you very much for your attention.
Science funding is not adequate for scientists. We're having to write too many grants and spending less time coming up with innovative ways to cure diseases. Teachers are not given livable wages. We've seen strikes throughout in Oklahoma and other states as teachers are having to fight to be able to live and support the students that they want to educate. And truth is not being emphasized by news organizations that a lot of people turn to for news. And so in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected president, I started organizing in Connecticut, and we started a group called Action Together Connecticut. We now have 6,000 members throughout the state, and we've been coming up to this building, the Legislative Office building, to hold our elected officials accountable for evidence-based policies and policies that support people over profit. I know that science is about hope. Science is about discovering new medicines to cure the diseases that affect our family members. Science is about developing new technologies that make an opportunity and access for everyone. Science is about innovation and building new technologies that will not only drive our nation's economy, but will make our lives easier and better. So I hope that you will do 3 things after today. I hope that you will call your state and federal legislators to hold them accountable for evidence-based policies. We want to have research for gun violence prevention. We want to have enough money to fund science for these innovations of the future. I want you to talk to the public about science.
The scientific process requires a commitment to defend the budgets to study treatments for mental health and to be able to fund the promising careers of young minds who want to pursue a career in mental health. It's a way to be able to, it requires a commitment from us to be able to ask our representatives in government to say, thoughts and prayers are nice and appreciated, but funding is better. requires a commitment from us to be able to actually look at the scientific process, to defend that aspect. As Dr. Horsley said, to let the evidence and data dictate policy rather than ideology.
But I have taken part in the advocacy for electric, zero-emission school buses. In March, CHISPA and many of our allies submitted a joint letter to DEEP asking them to use the Volkswagen mitigation funds for clean transportation for kids.
Hello everyone, my name is Anderson Elim and I'm a CHISPA promoter. Through CHISPA, I promote environmental justice to protect my communities from pollution and climate change.
My name is Dr. Jones and I'm a CHISPA promoter. CHISPA Connecticut and the CT League of Conservation Voters have recently signed on to a Clean Energy for All campaign to move our communities closer to the goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. We are advocating Senate Bill 7 to get Connecticut to reduce its greenhouse gases emissions by 45% by 2030, as well as Senate Bill 9 to increase Connecticut's renewable energy use up to 40%.
You know, I'd be thrilled if the sole reason that we were here today was simply to celebrate science. For me and the other 600 scientists at my agency, I think that alone would be a pretty great way to spend a Saturday. But we know why we're really here. We're here because federal environmental policy has continued stepping backwards, rolling back vehicle emission standards, withdrawing from the International Climate Agreement in Paris, repealing the Clean Power Plan. It keeps finding ways to prioritize polluters' profits over people and the planet. We're here because funding for scientific research on critical issues is being diminished or halted altogether. We're here because we've seen policymakers turn away from science as a vital resource to inform policies that affect every aspect of our lives and our environment. At times, it can feel like we're staring into a scientific and environmental dark ages when our administration is rejecting years of meticulously collected knowledge about our Earth's climate and relentlessly trying to reverse our hard-earned environmental progress. Now, I say that they're trying because we know they haven't won the battle yet. And I know the fight is hard. Sometimes I hear folks discouraged that the scale of our environmental problems is too big, is too economically and politically charged, that the absence of federal leadership is too overwhelming to overcome, especially for a small state like Connecticut. I feel and hear that concern every day. But I think history shows us that there's a different way to look at our present moment. It tells us that big changes always start with small actions, that we started this country as a collection of colonies, then states, that saw more benefit working together to create a better whole, and that the biggest variable that shapes our destiny is we, the people.
Humans are supposedly the smartest creatures on planet Earth, but is that so? We are destroying our Earth. We are causing greenhouse gases, which in turn cause global warming. Then global warming brings natural disasters. Natural disasters cause unsanitary conditions, and when there are unsanitary conditions, there are diseases. Science is amazing, but it can be used well for good, or it can be used unwisely for bad. Global warming needs to be stopped now, or it can never be stopped in the future. The scary thing is, my sister Emily, my brother Evan, and I, as a future scientist, realize this, and yet somehow some people do not. Yes, the sun will go nova sometime in the future, but that is a long time from now. In fact, it is precisely 7.6 billion years. Global warming is a much bigger threat. While we need to pay attention to the air that we breathe, we also need to pay attention to the resources. Science needs to be passed down from generation to generation like a family heirloom. Scientists scientists will help us along the way. And if we don't do anything, then humans, supposedly the smartest creatures on Earth, will be the cause of their own downfall. So help. I hope you enjoyed my sister's speech, and thank you for coming.